Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome. I'm gonna give it one more minute before I'll actually start the webinar. Just waiting for the last few people to hop in. All right, let's get started. So again, welcome and thanks for joining this webinar by Blackbird Cloud. We're going to be discussing building the foundation for your AWS Cloud environment with open source Terraform modules part 1. Created by myself and my colleague Sakif Sarur. So this is the agenda for the webinar. We have about 30 minutes to discuss the first 7 points, and followed by about 15 minutes available for Q&A. If you have any questions, please write them in chat. So we'll address them at the end, or I suppose I can also react to them immediately. I will be reading the chat, and my colleague Sakif will also be tracking those. Right, so we'll first start with a brief introduction of the team and company. We'll go over the value of open source and the importance of having a solid cloud foundation. We'll briefly discuss the webinar series, and then we'll get into the more interesting parts where we show you guys an example of how a solid AWS Cloud Foundation could look like. The components of that are, indeed, GitOps, CI/CD, and we'll cover the aspects, account and user management for the Cloud Foundation in this webinar. Right, so meet the team. It's myself, my colleague Sakif, and Tom Bogers. We started Blackbird Cloud late 2019. We are a cloud management partner and consultancy. We all have a background in software engineering. Currently, the main thing we do is manage clouds and/or provide consultancy to a number of international startups, scale-ups, MKB, and business units of larger companies such as DPG Media, ChargePoint, and Zurich Insurance. We take pride in representing these 5 values in our work. We believe that in order to provide the best service possible to our customers, partnership, reliability, expertise, transparency will ultimately lead to an acceleration and a long-lasting, mutually beneficial relationship between us and our customers. Enough about us. Let's get into the slightly more interesting parts. Our expertise and transparency are visible in how we produce and maintain open source Terraform modules. The large number of open source libraries that we have produced ourselves and also produced by other open source communities allow us to build cloud landing zones and components in a very rapid fashion, allowing us to deliver value fast to everyone. It's a little bit too short time to really go into the full depth of the benefits of open source in general, but I'll summarize. I have a great summary written down here. The value of open source lies in its accessibility, collaboration, flexibility, quality, security, innovation, cost savings, and educational opportunities. Open source software has revolutionized the technology industry, democratizing access to software and fostering a culture of sharing, collaboration, and continuous improvement, which is a mouthful, but yeah, it's true. And to make an even shorter summary, I feel the prime benefit for everyone is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel again and again and again, right? Other people have already invented the wheel for you, which is great. And yeah, it's great to be contributing and sharing software and also Terraform or open source with people with that goal in mind. All of the modules and implementations that we will be sharing later on in this webinar are available on our GitHub. The modules are also, of course, available on the Terraform registry, so feel free to take a closer look at them if you feel like that. Right. Why is it important to have a solid cloud foundation? This will also drill down to a nice, yeah, I mean, I can speak about this for a very long time, but I have to drill it down to a short summary. So I lined out the in the bullet points the key elements why it is important, and I can summarize that. A solid cloud foundation is essential for organizations to harness the full potential of cloud computing, ensuring scalability, cost efficiency, reliability, security, collaboration, disaster recovery, and the ability to leverage emerging new technologies. It provides the groundwork for a flexible, agile, and competitive digital infrastructure. That is a mouthful again. So in an even shorter summary, what it will provide you with is, since you have all the essentials covered, it allows you to spend more time on what truly matters, which is delivering direct value for your company, right? Yeah, that is basically what it boils down to, and what in the end the benefit is for everyone. So about this webinar series, yeah, we basically want to take people on a journey on building the best cloud environment using readily available open source modules, right? So we're currently in the first part where we'll cover account management and user management. We plan to do a number of them, for instance, where we cover compliance, security, and governance aspects, application platforms, networking, monitoring, etc. For all of these webinars, we will be building and sharing open source modules, right? So nothing will be private. And the goal is at the end of the series, everybody should be able to create, a very solid cloud foundation fully with open source modules. And take the benefits of that, I suppose. Right. So, what does a solid AWS cloud foundation look like? This is a diagram of how an AWS organization would look like. This is basically inspired by the prescriptive guidance from the AWS security reference architecture, where you have a number of OUs, like security OU, where you hold your logs and tooling, your security tooling in. There'll be an environments OU or workloads OU, where you have your development workloads running in, and a production environment for your production workloads. There's an account where you keep all your monitoring tools in. There's an infrastructure OU which holds your primary networking resources, and a different account for your shared services. Now, for the scope of this webinar, we'll actually only be focusing on the root OU, in which lies the management account, the one you initially create when signing up for Amazon to create an account. To expand the example a little bit, we have actually created a number of the other OUs, and we created 2 more accounts, but we'll not be going into details on those yet. That will be saved for a next webinar. Right. Yeah. Another aspect that we wanted to stress out is GitOps. The key takeaway for GitOps is that it will allow teams within an organization to manage and deploy changes to infrastructure using Git as a single source of truth, right? Where the main benefits are obviously improved. It improves your collaboration, it increases your reliability, stability, it takes care of consistency, and it helps you standardize things. It also improves the ease of adoption for new team members, and it makes for better compliance and auditing features, right? So a little bit more tangible example would be if you were to use say you have your infrastructure repository, right, and you would be creating the resources locally, and you're working on this with the team, right, and everybody's working in their own branch, making cloud resources. It's very easy to get into state issues, right, where somebody had altered something in their branch, and then you're running something in your branch, and you get state inconsistency, which will obviously reduce reliability, stability, and it makes for a hard collaboration, right? On top of that, you would need to grant all team members admin access on basically everything, whilst if you have your pipeline strapped with that admin access, you might not actually need to give everybody full admin access themselves individually. That is more of a security concern and something for us to address at a later point, but just wanted to point it out. The example that we've built is, however, executable both from pipelines and also able to run it locally at a later state, though. Right, so now time to get into the interesting parts. I'll briefly, I'll cover this slide, and then we'll go into GitHub and get to the actual interesting stuff, I guess. So what we're going to be covering right now is the aspect accounting user management in perspective of your solid cloud foundation, so to speak. We'll be using the following 4 services from Amazon, right? We'll be using AWS organizations to create organization and to create accounts and to manage those. We'll be using the IAM Identity Center for user management and access controls. We'll use the IAM service to create a identity provider and a role for our GitHub project action pipeline to use. And we'll be using AWS Cloud Formation to bootstrap the environment initially, right? And we'll be using CloudFormation as well to create a number of stack sets to help manage the accounts, basically. Next up, we'll be using 2 tools. We'll be using Terraform and TerraGrunt. They basically help us make the make the infrastructure, keep it reproducible, and also keep it modular. which we also find important. That's kind of allows you to pick and choose, right? Because we'll be covering, especially later on in the webinar series, we'll be covering aspects which might not be equally relevant for all companies. Obviously, primarily in terms of security and access management, it's just more relevant to companies with more sensitive data and who have to comply with higher ISO standards or security standards. So making it modular makes it easier to pick and choose what you deploy, obviously. All right, then I'll get into my screen sharing mode, if I can manage to do that. All right, so what we have done, we have created a template which allows you to bootstrap an entire AWS environment as earlier described. We basically use this template ourselves as well with a number of the clients we have that are running on AWS. This repository currently includes the account management and the user management as described. It will make AWS organizational resources. It holds GitHub OpenID Connect provider stack, which creates the IAM resources for our GitHub actions to be able to manage our AWS account, plural. It includes indeed a starting template for GitHub Actions, a workflow to deploy the infra. And it includes a number of CloudFormation stack sets, which help account management. I'll explain a little bit more about these components when we go over them. So this project includes a simple 14-step program to how to deploy this. I will not go over these right now because it's just too much information. But if you are interested in giving this a spin, this how-to should help you create it. At a later stage, we will release a blog or a post with an actual implementation of this how-to. Right, so next, I briefly want to go over, whilst we're still on the template, I briefly want to go over the structure of this project. We have 3 folders here. The first one is templates. It holds a number of CloudFormation templates, 2 of which are used to do the initial bootstrap as described in the README over there. So that's in this folder. Right, so that holds 3 templates. One that creates the GitHub OpenID Connect provider. There's one that creates an IAM role, which is also used for GitHub in order to manage the non-management accounts, basically. And there's a template that creates a few resources that we use to maintain Terraform state. So it creates an S3 bucket, a KMS key, it creates an access policy, and those resources basically. Next interesting thing is the cloud folder. The cloud folder holds all the accounts and that holds all the resources created in that account, right? So currently our cloud consists of one account, management account, which is the one that you create upon initial sign up with Amazon. In this case, the name of the account needs to match the folder for sake of access mapping. there's a few tricks in here which use this the name of this folder to determine which credentials needs to be used at later stages. Right. So what we did is we took this template and we made an implementation. So I'm going to switch to that top right now, and then I can show you which resources we actually ended up creating to make this run. I guess I need to stop sharing and reshare. All right. So we copied the template into this project, and or at least we used the template to create this repo, and then we ran through all the 14 steps to bootstrap the environment, where we ended up creating the following resources. So the first thing we create on the management account is the organization itself, where we use the organization module that we created. Small caveat, this is already configured to also deploy a number or enable a number of security services, which are technically out of the scope of this webinar. So yeah, some of these can be ignored. Anyway, this module allows you to enable a bunch of services on organizational level. The organizational units is where things get a little bit more interesting. As earlier described on the template, we've created a bunch of OUs, the environments, develop, production, tooling OU, for which we also created a monitoring account just for the example. We're not actually doing anything with it. We created a compliance security OU with one account in it, the security tooling account. It's just here for the example. The account is created, but we're not actually going to make resources in it. And we've configured our contact information, which will be listed on all the AWS accounts. Right, so this module will basically create all the OUs. It will create all the accounts listed in here as well. In this case, it's a monitoring account and security account. It will enable a bunch of services, and that sort of covers this module at the moment. The module also allows you to enable a bunch of policies, SCPs, so to speak. We currently haven't configured any. We'll cover that in the security/governance part of the webinar. So that's for the organization module. We have deployed a account info module. This is basically a data source module. It doesn't create any resources, but this module allows us, basically sources the AWS region, account ID, partition, organization info, a bunch of IDs. It basically makes us data available that we need in further deployments. It doesn't make any AWS resources. Next part is the IAM Identity Center resources. Now we are connected to Google, or at least our company uses Google as identity provider and mail provider and whatnot. Google, unfortunately, does not support auto-provisioning of users and groups, which is unfortunate. Therefore, we had to create users and groups manually. You create them manually, and then Google and Amazon map your user on these users that you have created, right? If, for instance, you have your company is more Microsoft-based and you have Microsoft AD, then you don't need to create these users or groups. Your AD will sync all the users and groups you've given access on the ID into Amazon, and you can pick them up from there. In our case, that's not the case. So I've created 2 users, one for myself and one for my colleague. On this module, we've created one group called administrators with 2 members, which is again myself and my colleague. Third component for the IAM Identity Center are permission sets. Permission sets are basically the equivalent of IAM roles, right? It basically consists out of a bunch of policies strapped to a permission set or role with the name here, administrator access or power user view only. These are basically the default permission sets, right? So there's one with administrator access, one with power user access, one with view only, and a billing account one, or a billing job function role. For the default example, this is all nice. I think when you take this to a next level, you obviously want to fine tune your policies here a little bit, but for most basic cases, this will do. Fourth component for the IAM Identity Center is basically the account assignments. This is where you attach the before created permission sets. You assign them to groups and accounts, right? So this is basically where you grant people access. And in this case, we have a beautiful loop that grants the administrator group access, the administrator permission set on all accounts, basically. Again, here, this is nice for a bootstrap, but obviously you want to fine tune this for your own purposes, right? So that's it for the IAM Identity Center. Lastly, we have the stack sets, for which I'm going to ignore the top one because it's out of the scope of this story. So stack sets are an interesting concept. Stack sets allow you to create CloudFormation stacks, and it allows you to deploy them to an OU. In this case, we're deploying our Terraform state stack set, which holds a KMS key, it holds a bucket, right? And we are deploying it to the root OU, which is the topmost level OU. And we've configured this to auto-deploy everywhere. The power of this is basically if we were to add a new Amazon account anywhere, this stack will automatically be deployed to that account, right? So we don't have to do anything manually. If we make a new account, it will automatically deploy the stack, and there'll be a bucket and a key which we can use for Terraform state. Second stack set we deployed is a role for GitHub. We've also deployed this on the root OU, meaning that this role will also be deployed in all accounts. Now, we've configured this role to have administrator access at this point, right? And the trust policy of this role allows the initial GitHub role that we created is able to assume this role, right? So in the bootstrap of the environment, you manually have to create this stack set, which creates a which creates a identity provider and a role which your GitHub action uses to assume, right? And the role created by this stack set is allowed to assume this role in all accounts. This is basically what gives GitHub access to all your AWS environments and allows you to do GitOps, basically. I think that concludes the templates. each of the individual modules are linked on the slides, which will be shared, I believe. They all have examples on them. I think this sort of sums up the webinar, and we can go to the Q&A, and I managed to do it in exactly 30 minutes. I'm very impressed with myself. Not bad. Right. Do you guys, girls, ladies, or anything in between, are there any questions? I see Erin has a question. The implementation, is it accessible? No, that's correct. It is currently private. But I think my colleague already made it public. Yeah, so that should be accessible now as well for inspirational purposes. And remind me to make my main branch protected before you guys start making a variety of Amazon resources. Does anybody, or you, already been explained, great. Does anybody else have any questions? Else we can get on with it and enjoy our lunch. Oh, here's another one. What sort of companies should implement this approach, and what are the main benefits for these companies? That's a very good question. Let me browse back to the base it on this, I guess. So what we have created, we've created two things, right? So there's the modules, which allow you to do anything you want. And there's the template, which basically bootstraps you in this, in what is a good starting point for most organizations, right? So, what sort of company should be implementing this approach? I think every company needs a solid cloud foundation. However, depending on the type of company, you might need you might not need all aspects, right? So the very rigorous security and access management and governance features, you might not need these, right? And maybe there's a few other things you either don't need or you can configure differently, right? So the template is just more of an example guideline, which we have based off the AWS security reference architecture, right? But it's in no means a one size fits all, right? I hope that answers your question, Simon. Leonard, is there a reason for using Terraform instead of plain CloudFormation or AWS CDK? Good question. As with everything, right? It's always a little bit opinionated. What I like, or at least what we like about Terraform, is the modularity of it. Using full CloudFormation, that will also work, right? There's nothing wrong with it. I think in further further steps of this, of your cloud foundation or your application platform or your monitoring account, we will also start using different providers than Amazon, right? We will be creating resources in Kubernetes. We'll be creating resources in your monitoring stack, your Grafana, Prometheus, or whatever we'll end up using. So the benefit is a little bit more that you can use one tool to do everything. However, again, there's no I don't think Terraform is a silver bullet or anything. There's all the tools you mentioned are very useful, have their own use cases, and we love using CloudFormation as well, especially the stack sets part. Yeah, no, so there's no super specific reason, I would say. Does anyone have any other question? Is there a way to avoid having one top level OU, avoid a single point of access for everything? No, the root OU comes for free, and yeah, there's no getting around that. However, it does provide useful things, especially for in a case where you want to deploy, for instance, stack sets to all your accounts minus the management one. You mentioned avoiding a single point of access for everything. Yeah, I think the idea behind that, in the root OU, there's technically only one Amazon account, right? Which is the management account. Technically, to that management account, you don't need to grant anybody access to it, basically. I mean, like I mentioned in the GitHub story, if you have your pipeline create all these things, you don't need to grant individuals access to it. Or maybe just view access or, tailored access. So there's no point, there's always a place where you manage everything, and having that is sort of unavoidable indeed. However, when set up like this, you do minimize the amount of people that need access to it. You make it easy to separate it. Once we get to security and compliance and governance type of, once we start enabling those services, it also makes it very easy to keep track of who does what, right? Or at least it basically tracks all actions everybody does. And it allows you to manage the access as good as you can. Yeah, that's a good addition indeed, Leonard. I think, so if when bootstrapping the entire environment, the root account indeed is only used to create 2 CloudFormation stacks, which basically creates the resources for GitHub and Terraform state to be able to do its thing. After that, ideally, all resources are created with the through the GitHub roles, right? And as for individual access, like user accounts, ideally you only use them for viewing, right? Not for doing things. Yeah. Great. Does anybody else have another question? All right. I think that concludes it. Then I want to thank you all again for attending, and I hope everybody gets to take something away from this story. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, email, or give us a call. And we'll hope to see you guys on the next one. Thank you very much. You're very welcome.